Hidden stories, truth unveiled. Every tale a twist you're missing. Dig it up and hear it told. And that's history, stranger than fiction.
History Stranger Than Fiction, Episode 3, A Legend Ahead of His Time. George Armstrong Custer, a polarizing figure in American public memory, even before the fateful date with destiny at the Little Bighorn. Custer isn't just a historical figure, he's also a cultural icon, and like many American cultural icons, his image was largely shaped by Hollywood. Before I delve into the two movies that shape our perceptions of Custer, I want to spotlight the honorable mention. Santa Fe Trail, released in 1940, is notable for Ronald Reagan's portrayal of Custer. Reagan plays Custer as a charismatic young cavalry officer graduating from West Point alongside his friend Jeb Stuart. It's not historically accurate. Custer and Stuart were not friends, nor were they classmates, as Stuart was 6 years older than and 7 classes ahead of Custer. Opposite Reagan is Errol Flynn, who plays James Ewell Brown Stuart, or Jeb Stuart as most people know him. Flynn's next movie, They Died with Their Boots On, Flynn gets his shot at Custer. And it's from this movie we get our earliest seminal Custer performance in popular culture. Flynn portrays Custer as an idealized soldier, honorable, courageous, and betrayed by flawed institutions. It was directed by Raoul Walsh and written by Wally Klein and Aeneas Mackenzie. The film's title was originally supposed to be about Texas gunfighter John Wesley Hardin, but when research found that he was a really bad man, the film was scrapped. Jack Warner loved the title so much he had the studio find another story fitting for the title. They settled on the Battle of Little Bighorn. Production on the film began as storm clouds were gathering in Europe and Asia. Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan were on the march, and France had fallen. Wally Klein was painfully aware the film might reach audiences when a crisis might happen. As Klein and Mackenzie put the final touches on the film's script, Nazi Germany was rolling to victory in France. Filming for the movie began on July 2, 1940, but was delayed because of Flynn's divorce of Lily Damita. Shooting wouldn't wrap until September 30th. It would end up 26 days behind schedule and some $350,000 over budget. Over 200 stunt extras, able to ride horses, were needed to recreate the movie's Civil War battles and The Last Stand. The action sequences were directed by Reeves Eason, who also directed the action scenes for the Charge of the Light Brigade and some of the scenes for the chariot race in Ben-Hur. The stuntmen were paid $250 a day at a time when the average working man made $65 a week. Tragically, 3 men died during filming. One was a heart attack where an extra dropped dead from the saddle. The second was an extra who had too much whiskey and fell from his horse and broke his neck. The third was Ralph Budlong, a polo player from Tucson, who recently became a father and inherited $1 million. He was an experienced horseman who had often played polo against Flynn when the game was all the rage among such actors as Will Rogers, Spencer Tracy, and Clark Gable. Budlong insisted on using a real saber in the Bull Run bridge sequence instead of a prop wooden saber. A special effects explosion spooked his horse and threw him to the ground. According to the official inquest, 8 days later, he died of advanced peritonitis after falling off his horse and impaling himself on the saber. The studio wanted some real Indians on hand to add authenticity to the film, so in early August, Assistant Mace Litson was dispatched to the Standing Rock Agency near Fort Yates, North Dakota. He brought back 16 Lakota men willing to come play Hollywood for a few weeks for the princely sum of $5 a day plus expenses. Studio publicity claimed that 2 of them were the great-grandsons of Sitting Bull. They must have been amused by what they saw. Most Lakota heard stories about the battle, and the way the battle was being filmed as a heroic fight was not what they had heard from their elders. Post-production was rushed, and the film was released to theaters on December 1st, 1941, only 6 days before the attack on Pearl Harbor. By contrast, Little Big Man, directed by Arthur Penn and written by Calder Willingham, stars Dustin Hoffman and presents a sharply critical portrayal of Custer, played by Richard Mulligan. Mulligan would play Custer as a narcissist who has a psychotic break during The Last Stand. Mulligan stayed in character for 5 months until shooting wrapped, doing bizarre things like writing military orders to communicate. His wife left him because of it. Little Big Man is a revisionist Western challenging the romantic notions of the Old West. The cowboys are not the good guys. The movie was made at a time that America was being divided by the Vietnam War, and the scenes covering Washita incorporated allusions to the My Lai massacre. The Department of Defense banned the movie from being shown in base theaters as it was detrimental to morale. The Washita scenes also used actual descendants of survivors. They wept between takes. The contrast between these two films illustrates how Custer's image has served as a cultural mirror, reflecting broader societal attitudes towards the United States at different moments in time. The Boots movie came out on the eve of entry in World War II and Big Man during Vietnam. People, when they hear Custer's name, see in him whatever aligns with their own beliefs about the United States. Much like interpreting an inkblot, observers project their values, guilt or shame, pride or patriotism onto his story. Some historians are perplexed on why Custer and the Little Bighorn get so much attention. It wasn't a decisive battle by any means. It pales in comparison in terms of casualties as opposed to the Civil War. The Lakota only delay an inevitable outcome with their victory. So besides the colorful characters like Custer, Crazy Horse, Sitting Bull, and Benteen, why should we care about the fight at Little Bighorn? It's because of what happens after. The U.S. government gets serious about settling the West, and while Custer undoubtedly has his critics, like President Grant, in the broader public imagination, he's something else. Not just a hero, he's now a martyr. What happens next might have happened anyways, but Little Bighorn and Custer's martyrdom accelerated it and maybe hardened it as well. The wars against the Plains tribes, including the Lakota, didn't just require soldiers. They required ongoing management, and that's when the executive branch's bureaucratic machinery began to take root. During active conflict, the U.S. relied heavily on the Army. But after military victory, responsibility shifted towards civilian agencies, especially the Bureau of Indian Affairs. The Bureau evolved from a relatively small office into a central administrative authority that managed reservations. It distributed food and supplies in its capacity as the day-to-day government on the reservations. It led efforts to civilize native tribes, which inflicted more long-term harm on native peoples than outright warfare in many regards. Many of the agents within the Bureau believed the best way to help the American Indians was rooted in the belief they should abandon their traditional cultures and adopt Euro-American ways of life. Tribes confined to reservations were encouraged or coerced into farming, adopting Christianity, and nuclear family structures. These conflicted with indigenous social and cultural practices. A major component of this civilizing mission was education. The Bureau supported off-reservation boarding schools, most famously the Carlisle Indian Industrial School founded by Richard Henry Pratt. These schools removed native children from their families, cut the hair of young boys, forced the wearing of American fashions, forbid indigenous languages and traditions, and sought to remake them into English-speaking, labor-oriented citizens. At the same time, the Bureau enforced policies tied to laws like the Dawes Act, which broke up communal tribal lands into individual allotments to instill private property values. While framed by officials as benevolent reform, these efforts disrupted tribal societies, eroded cultural traditions, and caused long-lasting social and economic harm. As the number of reservations grew, the federal government needed consistency. That led the Bureau to develop formalized rules and procedures, written regulations governing daily life, reporting systems, and data collection. This is the essence of bureaucracy, rule-based governance rather than case-by-case decisions. It also meant power increasingly came from agency guidelines, internal policies, and administrative decisions. Not the laws passed by Congress. The Bureau had to manage huge territories and populations from afar, so it developed a central office in Washington, regional offices, and local agents with regulatory power deciding how policies were applied on the ground. The Bureau became a template for later agencies like the Social Security Administration, Veterans Affairs, and the Environmental Protection Agency. If you've ever had an unpleasant dealing with any government agency, be it the Internal Revenue Service or the local DMV, where you were at the mercy of a caseworker deciding eligibility for benefits, an immigration officer making a judgment call at a port of entry or whether to detain you, or whether you obtained a permit to build upon your own land. You can largely thank the legacy bequeathed by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. All Americans of every color and creed became a little less free or better governed, depending on your philosophy on the role of government in everyday life, because of Custer's defeat at Little Bighorn. That is history stranger than fiction. It gets stranger yet when we look at his life. General Custer was born in New Rumley, Ohio, on December 5, 1839. He was the third of 5 children born to Emmanuel and Maria Custer. The family was extremely close and loving. George was especially close to his brother Tom. Both Tom and Boston Custer would die with him at Little Bighorn, as would his nephew and brother-in-law. George was babied by everyone in the family. As a toddler, when first learning to speak, he couldn't pronounce his middle name correctly. It came out as Audie instead of Armstrong. The nickname stuck for life. Even as a child, Audie Armstrong was physically handsome and in many ways a mirror image of Crazy Horse. He had long blonde hair and piercing blue eyes with a lean, athletic build. Being the center of attention as a child likely instilled a lifelong need for recognition and praise, which ultimately would become a literal fatal flaw. His father, Emmanuel Custer, was a blacksmith and a justice of the peace. In 1840s Ohio, a justice of the peace was a familiar figure in small communities, part local judge, part administrator, handling minor disputes, issuing warrants, officiating marriages, and keeping everyday order. Emmanuel was also a strident Democrat in an area dominated by Whigs and then later Republicans. Emmanuel Custer's success in becoming a justice of the peace would have depended less on ideology than on reputation. Being known as someone who could settle disputes, command respect, and be trusted to make decisions that neighbors would accept even when they disagreed. Audie Custer would likely have absorbed a practical lesson about authority, that it is something earned in public, maintained through visibility, and often secured through force of personality as much as principle. From a father who could navigate opposition politics and still hold office, he may also have learned that success sometimes required boldness, adaptability, and the willingness to assert oneself in spaces where one did not naturally belong. Those lessons, translated into a military context during the Civil War, could help explain both his confidence in leading from the front and his tendency to rely on audacity and personal reputation in situations where caution might have served better. Consider, too, that the Custer family was Methodist. The pastor at their church recalled Audie Custer as the instigator of devilish plots both during the service and in Sunday school. On the surface, he appeared attentive and respectful, but underneath the mind boiled with disruptive ideas. By most accounts, Custer was just an average student in school, one that was more into fun and pranks rather than his studies. He was sent to a family friend for an apprenticeship in furniture making, but failed. Emmanuel and Maria thus sent him to live with his older sister in Monroe, Michigan in 1852. Custer adored his older sister Lydia, and he would adopt Michigan as his home state because of his ties to his sister. With Lydia's support, he successfully finishes schooling and returns home to Ohio in 1855. His first job at age 17 was as a schoolhouse teacher. In places like Ohio, teaching was often a temporary or transitional job for young men trying to earn money before moving into law, politics, farming, or business. In the early 1830s, before becoming a lawyer, Abraham Lincoln taught school intermittently in rural Illinois. Teaching took Custer out of New Rumley and to the township of Katy. There he took up residence as a boarder with the Holland family. Alexander Holland was a superintendent of an infirmary and was very well connected within local Harrison County social circles. He also had an attractive teenage daughter named Molly. A romance between Audie and Molly bloomed. Custer wrote her poems with lines like, "I've seen and kissed that crimson lip, with honeyed smile overflowing. Dear Mary, thy eyes may prove less blue, thy beauty fade tomorrow, but oh, my heart can never forget thy parting look of sorrow." He signed his poems and letters to her as bachelor boy. When these notes and poems, especially one hinting at very intimate relations, came to light, Alexander Holland resolved to end the relationship. Holland's efforts to break up the couple led him to use his influence with Congressman John A. Bingham to secure Custer an appointment to West Point, effectively ending the courtship. This was very unusual because at the time West Point recommendations were usually reserved for political allies. Bingham was a Republican, and Custer was the son of one of the area's only Democrats. That Custer's military career was launched by a star-crossed tryst with a girl from the other side of the political tracks is history stranger than fiction. Custer continued to be an enigma as a cadet at West Point. Although he was sponsored by a congressman from Ohio, he registered his state citizenship as from Michigan. He continues past trends by doing poorly academically. He tells classmates if he can't be the top of the class, then he get notoriety and finish at the bottom. On purpose. This dubious badge of honor was known as being the GOAT. To become his class GOAT, Custer proceeds to accumulate more demerits than any cadet ever. He is the all-time GOAT. At the United States Military Academy in the late 1850s, discipline was enforced through a constant, accumulating system of demerits that tracked every lapse in a cadet's conduct. A cadet might earn them for something as small as arriving late to formation, neglecting a recitation, or appearing improperly dressed, or for more direct violations, such as disobeying orders, disrupting class, or failing to maintain a spotless barracks room. Custer's room consistently earned him demerits. It was a pigsty. In Spanish class, Custer tricked the professor into telling the class, in Spanish, the class was dismissed for the day and led the entire class out. He even got demerits for having his hair out of uniform. He let it grow so long that he wore a wig to hide its non-regulation length. A lot of the professors and military officers held a grudging respect for his boldness and wit. When the demerit total grew too high and exposed him to dismissal, Custer would lock himself in and get through the academic year. Despite his rebelliousness and mischievous behavior, Custer was immensely popular with most of the cadets in the student body. Custer had more fun, gave his friends more anxiety, walked more tours of extra duty, and came nearer to being dismissed than any other cadet I have ever known, a classmate recalled. Like many cadets, Custer frequented the notorious tavern called Benny Haven's, about a mile away. There cadets could get whiskey, hot rum flips, and Benny's famous buckwheat cakes to augment their meager dining hall fare. When the whiskey had done its work, the inebriated young men would break into the rousing renditions of tavern songs. Custer also led excursions from West Point to New York City by leaving early Saturday mornings under the cover of darkness and returning on Sunday afternoons in time for chapel services. There, the wayward cadets would do tavern crawls and visit brothels. It's believed Custer contracted gonorrhea in the summer of his third year, leaving him sterile. Where Custer enjoyed class, he excelled. Those were tactics and leadership, swordsmanship, and horsemanship. Custer was obsessed with breaking the school's record for horsemanship and finished second all time. The cadet he was chasing and failed to beat was none other than Ulysses Grant. Custer was the type of student who could blow off homework assignments, cram for a test, and do just well enough to pass, barely. He would not attend his own graduation ceremony. He was put under arrest for allowing two younger cadets to settle a dispute with a fistfight. Luckily for him, the Army would desperately need officers. His class was the class of 1861. The Civil War had just begun, and his well-connected classmates vouched for him as a courageous leader. At the First Battle of Bull Run, Second Lieutenant Custer saw his first action. As the tide of battle turned against the Union, Custer, assigned to Company G, 2nd U.S. Cavalry, found himself saving retreating Union soldiers from capture. During the chaotic Union retreat, Custer acted on his own initiative to keep the Cub Run Bridge open for the retreating forces. He kept a disaster from becoming a catastrophe. His unit was noted as being among the final Union formations to leave the battlefield. After the Confederates withdrew from Manassas to protect Richmond, Custer joined the Army of the Potomac and participated in raids around Yorktown. He was the first officer in the Union Army to capture a Confederate battle flag. Capturing a battle flag in the Civil War was a pinnacle of military glory, symbolizing the capture of a unit's morale, identity, and honor. It signaled the collapse or forced retreat of the enemy's line, providing immense psychological victory. Captured flags were often displayed in state or federal armories to demonstrate military victory and bolster morale on the home front. For soldiers, losing a flag was a massive humiliation, while capturing one was deemed the highest act of bravery. Capturing Confederate flags would become a family affair, as Tom Custer is one of only 19 people in history to receive 2 Medals of Honor for separate actions, and the first to do so for seizing Confederate flags at the Battle of Namazine Church and the Battle of Sailor's Creek. The feat was accomplished over a 3-day span in April 1865. At the end of a war, in a farewell speech to his Michigan volunteers, Custer claimed the capture of 65 Confederate battle flags. He made a show presenting many of them to distinguished persons. Custer was fearless in combat, and his men loved him. He wore uniforms of black velvet with gold braiding. He also often wore a red neckerchief so he could be easily spotted on the battlefield. Rival officers who didn't like his showboating said he looked like a circus performer. When he led his men on a charge, they would yell, "Wolverines," like in the movie Red Dawn. He always led a charge from the front and had multiple horses shot out from under him. He did receive some minor flesh wounds but escaped serious injury, which led to belief in Custer luck. In many ways, this is another echo of the perceived invincibility of Crazy Horse. Before the Little Bighorn and Washita, there were 3 battles that defined Custer. The largest cavalry battle ever fought on the North American continent was the Battle of Brandy Station in Culpeper County, Virginia. Custer served as aide-de-camp to the Union commanding general, Alfred Pleasonton. According to eyewitnesses, Custer was the most striking of the group with his long hair and spirited manner. He seemed to enjoy the shelling and appeared to beam all over, almost dancing with excitement. His bravery under fire and bold decision-making would lead him to being promoted from captain to brigadier general at the age of 23. The promotion was called a brevet. It was an honorary promotion for valor or meritorious service that allowed an officer to use the title in correspondence, but rarely provided the pay or authority of the higher rank, except in specific scenarios like courts-martial. Officers in the volunteer army held commissions that were valid only for the duration of the war, and volunteer officers were forbidden by Congress to outrank a regular army officer in the same unit. A captain in the regular army could be commissioned as a colonel in a volunteer regiment, reverting to captain after the war. When the war ended, Custer would revert from major general to lieutenant colonel, but many of his friends and supporters continued to address him by his Civil War rank. This was a common custom in the post-Civil War Army. Custer was promoted to brigadier or 1-star general just days before he led the Michigan Volunteer Cavalry at Gettysburg. The Battle of Gettysburg, fought July 1st to July 3rd, 1863, was the turning point in the Civil War. It has been called the high tide of the Confederacy. On the first day of the battle, Confederate infantry searching for supplies west of Gettysburg ran into Union cavalry, escalating into a major fight. Despite the arrival of Union infantry, the Confederates drove Union forces back through the town, but they were able to establish defensive positions on the high ground outside of town. By the start of fighting on the second day, Union Army positions formed a fishhook shape from Culp's Hill along Cemetery Ridge to Little Round Top. On the third day of the battle, Lee ordered a massive frontal assault, known as Pickett's Charge, against the Union center. Lee ordered General Jeb Stuart, his commander of cavalry, to move around the Union right flank and attack into the Federal rear, aiming to cause confusion and disrupt supplies, particularly in support of the planned infantry assault on Cemetery Ridge. This major cavalry battle, often called the Battle of East Cavalry Field, resulted in a stalemate, which prevented Stuart from reaching the Union rear. Custer personally led several high-risk, desperate cavalry charges on July 3rd, including a key charge with the 1st Michigan Cavalry that repulsed a Confederate advance. While the cavalry clashed at East Cavalry Field, the climax of Gettysburg began with a 2-hour artillery bombardment, one of the largest in history, intended to soften Union defenses. Around 3 p.m., nearly 12,500 Confederates, including General George Pickett's division, marched across a mile of open field toward Cemetery Ridge. Despite taking devastating losses from Union rifle and artillery fire, a few Confederates briefly reached the top of the ridge before being repulsed or captured. Had Jeb Stuart broken through, the tide could have easily shifted in favor of the Confederacy. Instead, the charge was a catastrophic failure, with over 50% of the attackers becoming casualties. Pickett famously later told Lee, "General, I have no division," and on July 4th, Lee began a long, rain-soaked retreat back to Virginia. Later that year, President Abraham Lincoln dedicated the Soldiers' National Cemetery with his famous Gettysburg Address. As a result of his contributions and flamboyance, Custer would start to receive a lot of media attention. Writers from magazines such as Harper's Ferry sought him out for interviews. Papers across the North publicized dashing accounts of his exploits and daring do. Custer learned to seek out the media and use it to further his reputation. In the spring of 1864, as the Union vice tightened on Richmond and General Lee, one of the final battles of the war would propel Custer to even greater heights. His fame would rival celebrities of his time such as P.T. Barnum and Jenny Lind. In a time before movie stars, recording artists, and professional athletes, a Civil War hero could amass fame and acclaim. On the outskirts of Richmond, a dilapidated building near the intersection of Telegraph Road and Mountain Road that was once a tavern, known for its yellow exterior, became the site for what is now known as the Battle of Yellow Tavern. It was here that General Lee and General Stuart made their own last stand. The Union commander, General Philip Sheridan, placed Custer in his favorite regiment, the 1st Michigan Cavalry, in his vanguard. On May 9th, Custer and his men made a charge at Beaver Dam Station on the Central Railroad and rescued 400 prisoners of war from being sent to Andersonville Prison. He also seized over 150 wagons, depriving the Confederates of badly needed supplies. 2 days later, the battle Sheridan was hoping for commenced. It would also be a time when Custer displayed tactical brilliance in dividing his forces. We don't know if this was the first time he did so, but it was certainly one of the more successful ones. Custer sent his beloved 1st Michigan directly at the Confederates, while keeping the others in reserve. After some initial success in driving the Confederates back, there was a lull in the fighting. During this lull, the Confederates brought in artillery batteries to support their lines. Custer took advantage of the respite and reconnoitered the Confederate position during this time and discovered the movement of the artillery. Custer determined that an attack could be made. Custer rode to Sheridan's headquarters with a proposal: an attack on Griffin's artillery. To silence the guns, Custer planned to send the 1st Michigan in a mounted charge up the Telegraph Road, with the 7th Michigan formed in column to support the assault by flanking the Confederate defenses. Meanwhile, Custer's 5th and 6th Michigan were to advance dismounted against the center line. In military parlance, this called a fix and flank and remains a staple of U.S. military doctrine in both the Army and Marine Corps. A fix and flank with deception was the basis for the liberation of Kuwait during Operation Desert Storm. For additional weight, Custer borrowed the 1st Vermont from Colonel George Chapman's brigade. Sheridan approved the plan, and the regiments formed for the assault. Around 4 p.m., Custer and the supporting elements rolled forward. As soon as the 1st Michigan moved from the cover of the woods, the enemy divined our intention and opened a brisk fire from his artillery with shell and canister, Custer wrote. Despite the fire and the stream crossing, the 1st Michigan stormed up the ridge toward the Confederate guns. Stuart watched from nearby as the Wolverines punched a hole in his line. Reinforcements, however, were on their way. Stuart was exuberant as he watched Company K from the 1st Virginia arrive and drive back the 1st Michigan. He even joined in the fight and opened fire on the retreating enemy. Then tragedy struck. Stuart was shot by one of his own men by accident. The bullet entered Stuart's stomach and exited his back. The Confederacy's ultimate cavalier reeled in the saddle as men rushed to assist him. Before he was placed in an ambulance, Stuart turned command over to Fitzhugh Lee. As he departed the field, Stuart begged his men to keep fighting. Custer watched the repulse of his attack and sent the 7th Michigan and 1st Vermont forward. This assault, along with the unrelenting pressure across their front, forced Lee to retreat. Sheridan's hope for engagement had ended in a Union victory. As the Confederates retreated from the battlefield, Stuart's ambulance made its way to Richmond. Around 11 p.m., it arrived at 206 West Gray Street, a house owned by Stuart's brother-in-law, Dr. Charles Brewer. In severe pain, Stuart was taken to the 2nd floor, where his condition continued to rapidly deteriorate throughout the following day. That evening, a party gathered in Stuart's room and, at the general's request, joined in singing his favorite hymn, Rock of Ages. At 7:38 p.m. on May 12, 1864, James Ewell Brown Stuart passed away. His inconsolable wife, Flora, wore a widow's black of mourning until her own death in 1923. Today, much of Yellow Tavern has been lost to time. Interstate 295, the northern and eastern bypass diverting traffic from interstates 64 and 95 around the cities of Richmond and Petersburg, has split the battlefield in two, most of it now lost to urban sprawl. Just under a year later at the Battle of Sailor Creek, where Tom Custer earned his second Medal of Honor, nearly one-quarter of Lee's army, roughly 7,700 men, including 8 generals, was cut off and captured, severely weakening his force. The loss of supplies at Beaver Dam Station and Jeb Stuart's death at Yellow Tavern left Lee with little hope of keeping the Army of Northern Virginia intact. Lee's troops were starving, low on ammunition, and exhausted, leading to widespread desertion. By April 8th, Union cavalry, led in part by Custer, reached Appomattox Station ahead of Lee, capturing his last remaining supply trains and blocking his path west. On the morning of April 9th, Lee ordered a final attack to break through the Union lines. While his troops initially pushed back Union cavalry, they crest the ridge only to find 2 entire Union infantry corps waiting for them. Realizing he was outnumbered roughly 5-1 and surrounded on 3 sides, Lee famously remarked, "There is nothing left me to do but to go and see General Grant, and I would rather die 1,000 deaths." Custer received the first flag of truce, not a literal flag, but a white linen dish towel, from the Confederate forces. When General Lee realized he was surrounded and sought a suspension of fighting, a Confederate officer, Captain R.M. Sims, was sent across the lines to find a Union commander. Custer's cavalry was the division directly in front of them, so Sims encountered Custer first. While Custer was present at the village for the surrender, he was not inside the McLean house during the actual meeting between Lee and Grant. However, he walked away with 2 of the most significant artifacts of the day. Custer kept the dish towel. His wife, Elizabeth Custer, later donated it to the Smithsonian Institution, where it remains today. General Sheridan purchased the small wooden table on which Grant had written the surrender terms for $20. He then gifted it to Custer for his wife, noting that no one had contributed more to the Union victory than her gallant husband. Libby Custer also bequeathed the table to the Smithsonian in 1936, where it too has remained on public display ever since. With the war over, the volunteers were demobilized. Custer's rank reverted from Major General to Lieutenant Colonel, and he was assigned to the 7th Cavalry. The debacle at Little Bighorn overshadows Custer's heroism in the Civil War. In many ways, he was cut from the same cloth as another aggressive general who would become as beloved and controversial as him. Like Custer, this general was beloved by his men, but would lose command temporarily for slapping a soldier. Like Custer, he would be resented by other officers for showboating with his polished helmet and ivory-covered pistols. That general was George S. Patton. So in many ways, Custer was a legend before his time, and that's history stranger than fiction. In our next episode, we'll learn about the women who played important roles in Custer's life.
Yeah. They call me George Armstrong Custer. Golden curls, sabers up. You're listening to a legend. Yeah. 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 Golden hair flashing, yeah, I cut across the line. Thunder in my blood, I was born ahead of time. Didn't play safe, I was breaking every plan. Held the reins of fate, tight gripped in my hand. West Point, last place, yeah, I flipped that script. Turned the bottom to the top with a gambler's grip. Saber in the sun, called my name in flame. If you remember me at all, then remember the name. Hero to the Union, villain in the dust. Didn't ask permission, I decided what was just. History don't judge me, it just feeds the flame. You can curse it or praise it, but you say my name.
Oh, he rides through the fire and the flame. Legend of his time, we remember his name. Oh, he claims he was the best there ever was.
Some cry glory,
Some cry blood. Custer luck rising high, then it fell again. Dust to dust with a proud have been.
best there ever was.
So the story says.
But the truth and the myth don't ride the same way. Bull run smoke, yeah, I stayed when they ran. While the blue line broke, I was making my stand. Snatched a rebel flag, held it high in the air. Turned a moment in the mud to a legend right there. Brandon Station, Thunder, Gettysburg heat. Who's hitting rhythm like a war drum beat? Yellow tab and steel called my name in deep. While the rest played checkers, I was playing for keeps. Truth's just a mirror, showing what you choose. I lived fast, played hard, yeah, I paid my dues.
So here I
Hear the thunder roll,
legend of his time, but who pays the toll?
oh, he swore.
He was heaven's call.
Some saw justice,
Some saw fraud. Custer luck rising high, then it fell again. Dust to dust where the proud have been.
best there ever was.
So the story said,
But the truth and the myth don't ride the same way. Aye. White flag stories, yeah, they twist with time. Glory bends truth when it's dressed in rhyme. Between the cheers and blame, I walk that line. Half man, half myth, still ahead of my time. Some call me savior, some call me flawed. Some say reckless, some say touched by God. But I never stood still, never bowed, never broke. I lived louder than the lies that history spoke. Roll where the bullets and the bad blood run, chasing down destiny under a burning sun. If the price was steep, yeah, I paid that cost. Every legend needs a line that gets crossed.
he rides through the dust and the flame. Legend of his time, we remember his name.
Oh, he claimed,
He was the best there ever was.
still we reckon with the blood.
Custer luck,
It rose, it fell,
still it flies.
echoes in the wind and the
Prairie skies,
best there ever was.
so the story's proud.
But every legend lives, and every legend dies. So let the viewers play where the past meets now. A man of contradiction, take your final bow. You can love me, hate me, draw your line, but I was the legend of my time.